Welcome to our open book. Thank you for being with us. Very good to be with you. Rhonda, Andrea, Roseanne Henry, Linda Grimm, Dorothy Joy, Marlo Faulkner. Have people asked you all your life any relation? SR, Ralph Rice, Carla Atkinson. Good to see you here with us. We're going to read a real classic tonight, Once More to the Lake, E.B. White, on Summer in Maine. And boy, mm, as I believe I said in the tagline, warm and cheery until the last line that will leave you, well, anyone. So I'm going to begin it in just a moment. Very good to be with everybody. Thank you. We've got some really terrific guests coming up this week. Hi there, Mr. Dickens. We're going to have to improvise a little bit from up here, but it'll be good to be with everybody. Mr. Dickens, I don't know if you noticed, but Howard Bryant, of course, mentioned the primary role of. Well, I just might read the end of that too some night, Carly. Good. It's worth getting into that. Howard Bryant, Mr. Dickens, mentioned the central role of Ticketmaster, from what you were saying. So let me just begin. E.B. White, Once More to the Lake. One summer along about 1904, my father rented a camp on a lake in Maine and took us there for the month of August. We all got ringworm from some kittens and had to rub Pond's extract on our arms and legs night and morning, and my father rolled over in a canoe with all his clothes on. But outside of that vacation was a success, and from then on, none of us ever thought there was any place in the world like that lake in Maine. We returned summer after summer, always on August 1st for 1 month. I've since become a saltwater man, but sometimes in summer there are days when the restlessness of the tides and the fearful cold of the seawater and the incessant wind which blows across the afternoon and into the evening makes me wish for the placidity of a lake in the woods. A few weeks ago, this feeling got so strong, I bought myself a couple of bass hooks and a spinner and returned to the lake where we used to go. I took along my son, who had never had any fresh water up his nose and who had seen lily pads only from train windows. I liked the sound of his son. On the journey over to the lake, I began to wonder what it would be like. I wondered how time would have marred this unique, holy spot that covers and streams the hills at the sunset behind the camps and the paths behind the camps. I was sure that the tarred road would have found it out and wondered what other ways it would be desolated. Strange how much you can remember about places like that once you allow your mind to return into the grooves which lead back. You remember one thing, and that suddenly reminds you of another thing. I guess I remembered clearest of all the early mornings when the lake was cool and motionless. Remembered how the bedroom smelled of the lumber it was made of and the wet woods whose scent entered through the screen. Partitions in the camp were thin and did not extend clear to the top of the rooms, and as I was always the first up, I would dress softly so as not to wake the others and sneak out into the sweet outdoors. Start out into a canoe. I remember being very careful never to rub my paddle against the gunwale for fear of disturbing the stillness of the cathedral. My God, what a great beginning. The lake had never been what you would call wild. There were cottages sprinkled around the shores, and it was in farming, although the shores of the lake were quite heavily wooded. Some of the cottages were owned by nearby farmers, and you could live at the shore and eat your meals at the farmhouse. That's what our family did. I was right about the tar. It led within a half a mile of the shore, but when I got back there with my boy and we settled into camp near a farmhouse, and at the kind of summertime I had known, I could tell it was going to be pretty much the same as it had been before. I knew it lying in bed the first morning, smelling the bedroom and hearing the boys sneak quietly out and go off along the shore in a boat. I began to sustain the illusion I began to I began to sustain the illusion that I was, and therefore by simple transposition, that I was my father. The sensation persisted, kept cropping up all the time we were there. It was not an entirely new feeling, but in this setting it grew much stronger. I seemed to be living a dual existence. I'd be in the middle of some simple act. I would be picking up a bait box or laying down a table fork, and I would be saying something, and suddenly it would be not me, but my father who was saying the words or making the gesture. It gave me a creepy sensation. We went fishing the first morning. I felt the same damp moss covering the worms in the bait can and saw the dragonfly alight on the tip of my rod as it hovered a few inches above the surface of the water. It was the arrival of this fly that convinced me beyond any doubt everything was always as it had been, that the years were a mirage. And there had been no years. The small waves were the same, chucking the rowboat under the chin as we fished at anchor, and the boat was the same boat, the same color green, and the ribs broken in the same places. There had been no years between the ducking of this dragonfly and the other one, the one that was part of memory. I looked at my boy, who was silently watching his fly, and it was my hands that held his rod, my eyes watching. I felt dizzy and didn't know which rod I was at the end of. We caught 2 bass, hauling them in briskly as though they were mackerel, pulling them over the side of the boat in a businesslike manner without any landing net, and stunning them with a blow on the back of the head. We got back for a swim before lunch, and the lake was exactly where we'd left it. The same number of inches from the dock. There was only the merest suggestion of a breeze. It seemed an utterly enchanted sea, this lake you could leave to its own devices for a few hours and come back to, and find that it had not stirred, this constant and trustworthy body of water. In the shallows, the dark, water-soaked sticks and twigs, smooth and old, were undulating in clusters on the bottom against the clean-ribbed sand. A school of minnows swam by, each minnow with its small individual shadow doubly in the attendance, so clear and sharp in the sunlight. Some of the other campers were swimming along the shore, one of them with a cake of soap, and the water felt thin and clear and insubstantial. Over the years, there had been this person with a cake of soap, this cultist, and he was here. There had been no years. Up to the farmhouse to dinner through the teeming, dusty field, the road under our sneakers was only a 2-track road. The way led past the tennis court, and something about the way it lay there in the sun reassured me. The tape had loosened along the back line. The alleys were green. There was a choice of pie for dessert. One was blueberry, one was apple. And the waitresses were the same country girls, there having been no passage of time, only the illusion of it, as in a dropped curtain. The waitresses were still 15. Their hair had been washed. That was the only difference. They had been to the movies and seen the pretty girls with the clean hair. Summertime, oh summertime, pattern of life indelible. The fade-proof lake, the woods unshatterable, the pasture with the sweet fern and the juniper forever, and the summer without end. The cottages were floating with their innocent and tranquil design, their tiny docks with the flagpole and the American flag floating against the white clouds and the blue sky. This was the American family at play, escaping the city heat, wondering whether the newcomers at the camp at the head of the cove were common or nice, wondering whether it was true that the people who drove up for Sunday dinner at the farmhouse were turned away because there wasn't enough chicken. It seems to me, as I keep remembering all this, those times and those summers had been infinitely precious and worth saving. There had been jollity and peace and goodness. The arriving at the beginning of August had been so big a business in itself. At the railway station, the farmer wagon drawn up, the first smell of the pine-laden air, shouts and cries of the campers as they saw you in the trunks to be unpacked to give up their rich burden. Arriving was less exciting nowadays when you sneaked up in your car and parked it under a tree near the camp. Peace and godness and jollity. The only thing that was wrong now really was the sound of the place, an unfamiliar nervous sound of outboard motors. This was the note that jarred, the one thing that would sometimes break the illusion and set the ears moving. Those other summer times, all motors were inboard, and when they were at a little distance, the noises it made was a sedative, an ingredient of summer sleep. There were one-cylinder and two-cylinder, and some were make and break, and some were jump spark, but they all made a sleepy sound across the lake. One night, in the still evening, and the afterglow lit the water, they whined about one's ears like mosquitoes. My boy loved our rented outboard, and his great desire was to achieve single-handed mastery over it. A little pause. And authority, as he soon learned the trick of choking it a little, but not too much, in the adjustment of the needle valve. But there was a way of reversing the engines if you learned the trick by cutting the switch and putting it on again exactly on the final dying revolution of the flywheel. Approaching a dock in a strong following breeze, it was difficult to slow up sufficiently by the ordinary coasting method. And if a boy felt he had complete mastery over his motor, he was tempted to keep it running. It took a cool nerve, because if you threw the switch a 20th of a second too soon, you could catch the flywheel. We had a good week at the camp. The bass were biting well, and the sun shone endlessly day after day. We would be tired at night and lie down in the accumulated heat of the little bedrooms after the long, hot day, and the breeze would stir almost imperceptibly outside, and the smell of the swamp drift in through the rusty screens. Sleep would come easily in the morning. The red squirrel would be on the roof, tapping out his gay routine. I kept remembering everything, lying in bed in that morning. After breakfast, we would go to the store, and the things were in the same place: the minnows in the bottle, the plugs, the spinners disarranged, pawed over by the youngsters from the boys' camp, the thick Newtons and the Beeman's gum. Outside, the road was tarred, and the cars stood in front of the store. Inside, all was just as it had been, except there was more Coca-Cola, and not so much Moxie and root beer and birch beer and sarsaparilla. We would walk out with a bottle of pop apiece, and sometimes the pops would backfire up our noses and hurt. We explored the streams quietly, where the turtles slid off the sunny logs and dug their way into the soft bottom. We lay on the town wharf and fed worms to the tame bass. Either Letitia E. Flores. Everywhere we went, I had trouble making out which I was, the one walking at my side or the one walking in my pants. One afternoon, while we were there at the lake, a thunderstorm came up. It was like the revival of an old melodrama that I had seen long ago with childish awe. There was this big scene, still the big scene. The whole thing was so familiar, the first feeling of oppression and heat, and a general air around camp of not wanting to go very far away. In the mid-afternoon, a curious darkening of the sky and a lull in everything that made life tick. And then the way the boat suddenly swung the other way at their moorings, and the coming of the breeze and the premonitory rumble. Then the kettle drum, the snare, the bass drum, and the cymbals, the crackling light against the dark, and the gods grinning and licking their chops in the hill. Afterward, the calm, the rain, steadily rustling in the calm lake, the return of light and hope and spirits, and the campers running out in joy and relief to go swimming in the rain. Their bright cries perpetuating the deathless joke about how they were getting simply drenched, and the children screaming with delight at the new sensation of bathing in the rain. And the joke about getting drenched linking the generations in a strong, indestructible chain. And the comedian who waded in carrying an umbrella. When the others went swimming, my son said he was going in too. He pulled his dripping trunks from the line where they had hung in all through the shower, and wrung them out. Languidly and with no thought of going in, I watched him, his hard little body skinny and bare, saw him once slightly as he pulled up around his vitals the small, soggy, I've got this ending I've got to nail. And the others went swimming. My son said he was going in too. He pulled his dripping trunks along from the line where they had hung all through the shower and wrung them out. Languidly and with no thought of going in, I watched him. His hard little body, skinny and bare, saw him wince slightly as he pulled up around his vitals the small, soggy garment, as he buckled the swollen belt. Suddenly my groin felt the chill of death. Oh my God. Summer in Maine, a week with his son, reminds him of his own youth and pierces through to his sense of mortality. Good Lord, what a story, Once More to the Lake by E.B. White. Yeah, I hope I've prepared you for that. Of course, part of the art of it is you're not prepared. You have trigger warnings nowadays. So thanks very much for being with us in our open book. Very good to be with you. I'll keep you up on the guests that we're going to have. Some really nice ones. Kurt Anderson, his new book. His novel's getting a lot of attention. People are going to talk to our friend Ron Charles. A couple of other things. So thanks for being with us on our open book. Thank you very much for being with us. Yeah, take cover and batten the hatches. Linda, please, yes. So, take care. We'll see you later. Good to be with you, Lucy Fellows and Rick Dabrowski. Thanks, Mary Glazer. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, Paul.